school, like a nice non-Jewish boy, aged 8, Mill Hill, 8 to 18. And it was kind of, in those days, it was sink or swim. I later found out that I followed in the footsteps of Nigel Ross, and there's always a kink in your upbringing that gives you, I find, a certain drive and a will to succeed. So Nick Lesdor was 2 years above me, and I struck up a bit of a friendship with Nick, and he was a bit of an older brother and a bit of a protector growing up, with a little bit of sort of anti-Semitism, things that were knocking around quite openly in those days. And I had quite a tough time with 2 siblings, and I had some great offers from uni. I had 3 C's to go to Cambridge for estate management, etc. And it got to a point growing up where my mother was moaning about bills, and I wanted to prove myself. I got out to work very quickly. David Herrera heard that there was a job going at Michael Koopman and Partners back in the day. And I joined there at £40 a week after having worked in the summer holidays for my uncle in the print business, which was the family business. And I became an office junior at £40 a week. And I went to Hammersmith and West London College, ISVA, 1 day a week. So I had day release. And he was an interesting guy, Michael Koopman. He had a niche investment and management based practice, and we acted for people like the Kirsch brothers, Gerald Ronson, and more particularly the Barclay twins, David and Frederick Barclay. So we had some Keys Allman, if any of you remember Mr. Stoutsker and Keys Allman back in the day. I think Manny Davidson had been involved with them. So they're quite sort of colourful characters, high net worths, and that was 1980-81. I lasted about 2.5 years there, and I did okay. I was hungry. I was started on management, then lettings, then investments, but I needed more money, and I wanted to come into more mainstream Mayfair. We were out on Shaftesbury Avenue, and I heard that Phil Sansa and Trevor Shelley left Reef Diner and to form Shelley Sansa. So I knew there were a couple of jobs going there, and I went down. I met Tony Reef and Tony Diners. They were known as the Two Toners, and I got on okay. And they made me an offer, and lo and behold, I was offered a company car at the same time. So all my ducks came home. I was riding the wave. I was on my way. In the early 80s, I don't remember, it was quite a sluggish time. It was beginning of Margaret Thatcher. She'd just broken the unions. There wasn't a lot of money around, but I learned hard and fast. I worked 7 days a week. I was super hungry, and I was always on the path where I was on a role that was always very commission orientated. And my first decent deals, my first decent client was Nick Lesdor with Sam Rosen. I don't know if you guys remember the formation of Burford. It was at the Liberal Synagogue in St. John's Wood. They were backed by a guy called George Foxshana. I don't know if you remember George. And he initially gave Sam money, and Sam bought a couple of big ground rent portfolios. That was his thing, from Hearts of Oak and Wimpy. And he was putting the stamps on the envelopes, posting the rent demands, the ground rent demands, etc., making money on licenses to alteration, licenses to assign. And Nick came to me and said, we want to get going on commercial. And at the time, Soho represented quite good value for money. So our first 2 deals were 2 buildings in Soho. And I remember like it was yesterday, there was a big restaurant called Hostaria Romana at 69 Dean Street. And the offices were vacant. It was a bad refurb, and there was a really weird nightclub in the basement. So here we are going around the building. We just bought it, and I remember Grangewoods were the lawyers for the vendor. And Nick's lawyers came up with an idea, and it could have been David Conway back in the day, of doing the stamp savings scheme. And it was sort of splitting the legal ownership, the beneficial ownership back in the day, and splitting the title. And it was late at night, and all of a sudden Grangewoods turned around and said, we want half the savings as a practice, acting for the vendor. And I thought, how is this deal ever going to happen? And it happened in the end at 3 in the morning. And that was my first decent commercial deal. I think My fee was £60,000. I was excited. Tony Reef and Tony Diner were really retail agents. All of a sudden, they were getting their name associated with commercial deals. And I remember going around after we exchanged with a gentleman in the basement who was this nightclub owner. And he turned around to Nick and he said, it's very important to have good local relationships with tenants and people in the area. And he was obviously a hard man, this chap. And it was basically a threat to Nick. And he was talking about contribution for the local amenities. And Nick pushed him away. And that night, the sinks were blocked. They flooded the building. There was blood everywhere. And that was a scary time in Soho. It was just at the time when the sex shops were beginning to lose their licenses and being forced out. So our next deal was 39 Dean Street opposite. And I was dealing with a guy who owned the sex shop, owned the freehold. And he had a lawyer called, someone called Duke Cohan, which was really a Jewish chap who changed his name from Cohen to Cohan. Richard, you're nodding like you might remember the bloke. But, and we ended up buying this building, and just after we exchanged contract, the guy had his legs broken. I mean, those were mad days. And we got a change of use to a restaurant, led it to a great Italian restaurant, got flats upstairs, and we were away. And those two deals must have made him £1 million odd back in the day, and that was it. Burford were on their way. And we were super close, and we were doing other deals. And then I met a guy through I think in a way possibly changed my life. Really put me on the launch pad, which was Barry Shaw. And I was friendly with Barry, and Barry had introduced me to the Thompson family, and I'd sold 1 Dover Street, and it was great with Richard Thompson, David Thompson, the father. And then he introduced me to a guy called David Phillips. And David Phillips used to be Rugby Securities. I did a little bit with him. He was with David Tye, but then David was offered a job or backing by a guy called Elliott Bernard, who I'd heard about. And Elliott was an interesting guy, a very colourful track record back in the day with Stephen Laurie, stock conversion, bit of a genius, an agent, a wheeler dealer, great charisma, very interesting guy, hugely connected with town and city, Lord Sterling. And so David joined Chelsfield, in fact, found the name Chelsfield. So he formed the company, Richard, as you know, as you remember. And that's obviously how I know Goody here through Chelsfield connections. And David came to me and said, you know what? I've just been offered a deal by a runner in Great Newport Street. I said, that's weird, because when I used to work for Michael Koopman back in the days, we acted for a small public company called Amalgamated Estates PLC, who bought the whole of Great Newport Street and Cranbourne Street after the Cranbourne family, who owns the Hippodrome, and Ned Cranbourne, very interesting, very old English family. And the last building left in the portfolio, which we didn't sell, which was a bit of a political hot potato, was the Unicorn Theatre. It's the last children's theatre in London, heavily protected by the council. But it was like an old warehouse building, and the theatre was downstairs. And David had it offered to him at 1.35 million. And he said, what do you think of the deal? I said, you know what? I think it's worth 3 million. And he said, really? He said, what will you charge me? And I said, 1.5%. So he thought, that's not too bad. And what I should have said, I should charge them a promote or a performance-related fee. Anyway, so David secured the building by taking £50,000 off Elliott Bernard with a 3-month completion, with no real money for the deal, but the £50,000, which was really like an option on it. And we struggled a bit. Then all of a sudden, out of the woodwork, there was a small PLC came along and gave us 3 million quid. So basically, that 1.65 million was the seed money for Chelsfield. And from then on in, we really motored. And my job within Chelsfield was to find the properties that could be traded, that was the trading profits, because they then became a public company, and they were aiming to make trading profits of anything from 15 to 50, 60 million pounds a year. And we had some most interesting times. I met the most fantastic vendors. I was called into deals. I mean, we were burning the midnight oil with Town and City. Elliott would sit with Lord Sterling. You know, they'd want to sell £100 million worth of property. We'd get the schedules. We'd have to work out strategy. We're on the roads. I had the staff working to midnight. We would be, at one stage, we were based in Bruton Place opposite the Guinea Grill. And I used to have the steaks brought in. And they were fantastic days. The market in those days isn't like it is today. It wasn't perfect information like we have today. We couldn't, there weren't so many players. And the debt markets were quite different as well. Debt was very relationship driven. And, you know, today we've probably got 160 banks and all sorts of different lenders, from regulated entities to unregulated. And they were different days. And if you got something completely off market, there was a bit of a story. You knew that there was an in fee, there was an out fee, and it was a fantastic time to trade. That so those were the sort of early days of Michael Elliott. And Michael Elliott, which I formed in November '85, so we're coming up to 35 years this November, was actually the first niche investment-based practice with limited liability. We're a limited company, which we had to get RSCS approval, and you know, and our professional indemnity had to accept we had limited liability. So we started as literally 4 partners, all very young. I was 24, 4 partners and a secretary. And it was an interesting start, because we had short-term offices at 67 Brook Street, which was the Stigwood organisation building, the record company, which was known for Grease, Saturday Night Fever, and they were still in parts of the building. But they owned a sort of 80-year lease. And it worked really well to begin with. We were in the back of the building, and it was a great address. Rent was affordable, and we looked out over a little terrace at the back, and we worked our socks off to get going. I remember it was all about cash flow, however you could do it. So I bought a property for a client off a failed auction lot. But when you set up, and we all used credit cards, I think we had £7,000 limits on our credit cards, and we made out that we all had £14,000 to put in. And I said, well, let's do half to begin with and see how it goes. None of us had the full amount to put in there. And so I remember buying a couple of controlled houses for a chap called Ashley Lass back in the day. David, you might remember Ashley Lass. Do you remember the Lass family? Big resi buyers, big tenanted, regulated portfolios.
My cousin.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And I grew up with them and Roger.
Right.
And
okay. Right. Sure.
then I bought a block of flats in Ascot Court, and off market for 300,000. I mean, these early deals were really quite exciting. And I met a guy, and you're all going to wince because you're all of an age where you're going to remember him, called Judah Binstock. And Judah Binstock backed a guy in London called Joe Fleming, who was an interesting guy. All they wanted to do was buy well-let government buildings, and they would get a big valuation, and Norwich Union would come along and they put 95%, sometimes 100% up, a bit like the Cengiz model. And we had a reasonable amount of success. And I remember turning around, and I was still living at home. I'd gone back and told my mother, well, it's going with this guy they flew me out to Switzerland to meet him, to Geneva. Lovely guy, used to be a lawyer, very smart guy. And my mother turned pale. She said, Judah Binstock, apparently in the 70s, he had got round exchange controls and moved £100 million. He fled the country. He bought 500 acres behind Marbella Old Town. He'd been in Italy, been chased out by the Red Brigade. Long story short, he'd been exonerated, but I had mixed with 1 or 2 cross the line, colourful characters that had some checkered history, and the relationship came to a natural conclusion, and we moved on. But so I set up with guys who were really quite young. I was 24. I had a partner of 28. I had a guy called David Saul, who Peter Hoffman will remember from Michael Lorry days, and a guy called Jeremy Charles. And the practice evolved. David was doing shops. Shops were not making money. He was my best friend, and I had to sit down and buy him out. And I actually gave him more than he asked for. but it wasn't working out. And then I wanted to act for him as a principal. He as a principal. I ended up buying a few buildings for him, actually ex-town and city buildings, led to a company called Uber Highfields, who was serviced office providers. They ended up being fraud. He ended up taking control and ended up with a massive serviced office business called Business Environment Group. They 900,000 feet at freeholds in London. So I planted myself, and I tell people today that good businesses, good agency practices are based on loyal client base, people that you build a relationship with and travel through your business career with. And I look back and I look at, and this is my fourth recession. And I think each time we have to slightly reinvent ourselves, but I look back and I have these same clients, a lot of the same clients that have stood the test of time. And where we also score, and I don't like to sort of make it sound like out of people's misery, but I do get called in by the banks for workout jobs. So whether it's back in the day when there were the Swedish banks breaking up to good bank, bad bank, to RBS, to Nippon Credit Bank. I broke the whole of Nippon Credit Bank up, and a lot of it has been not even using LPA receivers. It's mortgage in possession. The borrower is so underwater. You approach the borrower, will you sign off, please? And it's a quicker, easier process. And so I would say another defining time for me was when we set up. I had a guy called Jeremy Charles who was of management background. Again, he was Michael Laureate with Elliott. So we'd set up in the early days a management business. And there came a point where we parted company with Jeremy. I handed him the management business and I couldn't manage again for 3 years. And then I met a guy called Andrew J and Nigel Ross and at Ross J. And I started harnessing management and formed a joint venture with them. And it grew and grew and grew. Their portfolio, when I came along, was 300 million. It grew to such a size that I bought half the business. And now it manages 6 billion. But I wouldn't say it's a particularly lucrative business, but it's a business that keeps you very close to the client and keeps you as a one-stop shop and kind of protects your position with the asset going forward. But it really grew from 2001 onwards. So I think this time round, and it's now quite useful because with all these buildings, I almost have a captive audience where certain people want to exit, they might want to exit quietly. So it keeps us in a position where we've got a constant potential sales book or purchase book. And we transacted, I would say, since inception, over 60 billion. So on a bad year, it's 1 billion. On a good year, it's 2 billion in turnover. It's probably 60% sales, 40% acquisition. So, and some of the buildings I must have traded up to 4 times. Burlington Arcade, as an example, and I sold it, I think 2 years ago to the Rubens. That was my 3rd time, and that totals 500 million. The old Gamages site at 120 Holborn, that must be 3 times 500 million. And it's like the boomerang effect. Once you know a building and understand complicated assets, you're quite well placed to stay attached. And when you manage, as I said, you stay with it. But I think, as I said before, every recession we seem to reinvent ourselves. And certainly this time round, I found that I treated lockdown as a bit of a sabbatical. I started getting more involved with social media, looking at LinkedIn, looking at Instagram. So LinkedIn, when we went into lockdown, I had 300 contacts. I've now got 1,400 contacts, and I started doing a webinar on Instagram, live thing with Nigel Burney, and it was we wanted to make it fairly light-hearted and fielding questions. He questioned me, and from there it snowballed, and I think it's good to reach out, and we're all in the same boat. We're all facing the same. As an agent, I'm slightly different because I've not got, apart from my big mortgage, I've not got a big interest bill, and I'm only as good as my last deal. But I think we are all in the same boat in the terms of how are we collecting our rents, how are tenants going to fare on this June quarter day? How are we going to fare in quantitative easing, in paying back this debt that we're taking out? How is the government handling this terrible crisis? It's and with you guys, you've never experienced this before. Obviously, you know, some of us remember the 70s. I was still a student in the 70s, but that was pretty horrific. Rent freeze, miners' strike, 3-day week, and every recession throws something else off. I mean, I've got to say, this time round, I think that the manipulation of interest rates, quantitative easing, makes property as an asset class, and taking into account volatile equity markets, makes property as an asset class quite interesting for people who are very scared of the onset of negative interest rates. And the first shot across our bows was obviously the government issued a 3-year gilt in mid-May, and that was minus 0.0033% with a £3.8 billion take-up. So it shows that people are so worried about safety of their wealth that they're prepared to take a negative return. So as an investment house, we've had a lot of interest for wealth preservation stock, i.e. undoubted covenants, 5-year plus income. And the wealth out there is absolutely extreme. And what I think is going to be a product of, and what we saw in 2009 going forwards, was the creation of huge wealth, and the poor got poorer and the rich got richer. And I don't see any change now, although the government today are slightly more left-wing than before in terms of trying to help people. But, you know, looking at the marches that have been going on following the deaths in the States and race relations, etc., there's so much anger out there. America's obviously a lot worse than we are. The looting is still going on in the States that you're not seeing. I mean, New York, going from Manhattan to Brooklyn to Queens, every night there's looting. So the world is in a really funny place, and you've suddenly seen a flashpoint between China and India. And then, you know, you fear for China to Taiwan, North and South Korea's come on again. So we have to be quite mindful of what is going on out there, and how do we get out of where we are. I think the way of life will change. I think that you know, people's profiles will become lower. I think holidays will change, and I think it's going to take quite a long time. I'm not an advocate of a V-shaped bounce back. Do you remember seeing Bank of England's prediction originally that GDP this year will shrink 14% and bounce back next year and grow 15%? I think everywhere you look, we've got hurdles to overcome. You know, particularly this Brexit. So the foreign entities I deal with, and I would say 70% of our work is with overseas. A lot. I mean, I've got a small office in Singapore, so we've got a finger on the pulse with Hong Kong, Singapore massively, and some of the other regions covering Malaysia, Taiwan a bit, and Korea. And they are very concerned the effects of a hard Brexit. And you heard Angela Merkel yesterday say it was being leaked that Germany are making provisions for a hard Brexit. The shine has gone off Boris Johnson. You know, from almost from the second he contracted COVID. He doesn't feel like he's been the same. But the way they've conducted themselves, and this Dominic Cummings, who's obviously a quite clever strategist, you know, he masterminded the Brexit campaign and he masterminded the general election. And I speak to Simon Rubin quite a bit, because family, particularly Jamie, ran his campaign to become Prime Minister, was his treasurer, and helped get him elected Mayor for London. And the feeling is that he could be gone in 6 months. If he continues this path of protection of Dominic Cummings, U-turns all over the place, at odds with his scientific advisors, his medical officers, Sage, whoever Sage is, although it now appears Dominic Cummings is on Sage. So what does that mean politically? At least Keir Starmer one day could be there and could be a more acceptable face of the left than obviously Corbyn. So, I don't think we'd all reach for the hills and run for the hills if Starmer came. But at least the Tories have an 80-seat majority, but they've got to start to get their act together. And I'm here, people don't have confidence in Dominic Raab, they don't have confidence in Matt Hancock. So I don't know other people's views. And obviously I strayed off from talking about myself, going to the political scene and where I see what's going on. But I am at the coalface seeing the deals done and money put away. And I see families, particularly overseas families, we're doing a deal with a Chilean family, our second deal with billionaires. So, well, we know the market could go down the next 2 years, but we look for a 10-year to 20-year view. So, there is a slippery slope, it's perceived in the next 2 years. And then comes the question of affordability and rent payment. Which tenants are we comfortable with that can pay the rent? I mean, I looked at a building the other day in the city, yields are compressing, it's let to firm of lawyers, 8-9 year income, single let, freehold, glass building. And you look at where the turnover was for the law firm last year, say it was 100 million, the rent was 5. You think, well, what's the turnover this year? And how can they afford that rent? So who are you going to pick as your tenants? You'll probably pick a bank, because the chances are the big banks do get bailouts. Obviously the government, councils, we don't see councils going broke. So acceptability, so there's massive yield compression of these covenants. We sold a building let to the Home Office, the House of Commons. It was a really not good building, 2 years rent-free, 15-year term. And we had an amazing interest. The client was quite bullish. They wanted 3.75%. The rent was £65 a foot on a bad refurb in Victoria. And the government always says, the civil servants always said, whatever happens, if one day you get, if you go to sell, will you let us know, give us first refusal? And it was the most unusual conversation. It was, well, we've got £100 million lying around, and we were looking to sell the company, so we would max out, because there'd be a stamp duty saving, which in effect would go to the purchase price, which would go to the vendor. And long story short, the government turned around to me and said, well, as a government entity, we can't buy an SPV, a Channel Island-based SPV. And I said, well, you don't need to. And they said, well, why is that? I said, well, I was only offering it to you not to pay stamps. So they said, well, we'll have to pay stamp duty, SDLT. I said, no, you won't. Well, why is that? I said, because you're a government entity, you're exempt. So that was one unusual thing. So I got the equivalent of 3.25%. These are the guys we pay our tax to. And then they forgot to do AML. No AML. This is Chatham House rules, by the way, but no AML. No anti-money laundering, no KYC. Didn't even ask. And they didn't ask when they rented the building. So the price was around 100 million. Had they approached us before they rented the building, could we buy the building? We'd have said yes. How much? And we'd have said 80 million. So the waste. So when you hear Dominic Cummings wanting to do away with the civil service or thin it down, you can now understand the tremendous waste there is out there. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, I look back on my life, and a big thing for me is charity, as it is to most of you. And my pride and joy is, I think, 2002 we set up a group has set up Raise the Sunshine, and before that, as a kid growing up, I raised money for actually it's pre-Jewish Jewish care. It was the Jewish Welfare Board and the Blind Society. I don't know if you remember those groups. And my grandmother, who I was close to, was in Charles Claw House. I think it's Fortune Green Roads, Muswell Hill. And so as a teenager, I was out there trying to raise money. They wanted to raise an ambulance stroke bus so they could get the elderly out into day trips and all the rest of it. And I remember tapping family members up and anyone I knew with a few quid. And I was an emotional wreck even in those days, alongside presenting this ambulance. I had to wear sunglasses. I was bawling my eyes out. As I bawl my eyes out, anyone that knows me on our charity dinners, when we show videos and the way we touch lives. And the reason I mention all this is because as an agent, I don't feel there's too much of an end product. I do try and get involved with development, but I don't think we put back in, and it was my release, apart from all the sports I do, and charity is being I contributed in some shape or form. And we're all obviously now suffering very much from charities. Charity begins at home. And obviously the NHS, and I'll sort of mention this and getting over to the NHS, because I always looked at the NHS as a bloodsucker, taking out such a large percentage of GDP, and what's the end product there? And it's only when you end up with a pandemic, which was always my fear of a pandemic, looking at, I used to watch Ebola, SARS. What's the chances of coming here? What's the chance of it spreading? How can we fight it? And I was always conscious of what could one day hit. And then to be so ill prepared, and then these wonderful people at the NHS who without doubt, they're in the front line. They weren't fully protected with the right PPE equipment. They were up against something which we didn't know too much about. And they put their lives on the line. And it's not about money for these people, it's vocational. And so every Thursday night, the family and I are on that doorstep. It's like the Von Trapp family, 3 kids from the first marriage, 3 from the second, all girls from the second. And my wife is Australian, larger than life, banging on saucepan lids, clapping away. And one Thursday, an ambulance, I live on a set of traffic lights, which sounds like a really noisy part of the world to live, but and the ambulance stopped, and literally I was so emotional. And we're clapping, they're clapping us. And it was the best idea ever to try and show appreciation for people who kind of were a bit hidden. And actually, they are the most incredible people. The resources are amazing. And I think when we come out of this and you look at, say, the German system that's so well funded and supported, I almost think there'll be a separate tax like national insurance that goes to the health service. But and I think we recalibrate our lives. How much do we really need to live on? And what matters and what works, and about our fellow human being and showing acts of kindness. And it's true. I think you take time out. We've been gone 3 months now. I mean, admittedly, I'm here in the office, but you do get a chance to reflect, to read, and what a charmed life we've all had. And I think the property industry has looked after most of us pretty well. I mean, believe me, I'm no genius. I'm just a very focused, hungry, driven guy that's quite humorous. But this industry has given me a great quality of life. It's allowed me to pay my bills, have great holidays, have a great family. So, you can't take it all with you. And I think we now have got to be a bit more conscious of what goes on in the world and support one another. But, and I'm not Ed Miliband or a crazy lefty, but I think the world's changed, and I think the way we view the world has changed. I'm not sure there was an easy answer to racism. I'll give you an example. When you saw on Instagram the dark picture, and which all the big corporates are posting, the group went up to Knight Frank and said, "Could you please?" Who posted it? "Could you please send me a photo of your board directors?" And it's I wouldn't say it's necessarily endemic, the racism, but it has been around forever and ever. We're not race institution, racist here at all. If we can see the right person for the right job, we're going to take them on. But so, is there an easy answer to that? It's good that it's in the foreground. The footballers are pushing it hard. It's a bit strange watching football the way it's being played at the moment, but everything seems to have changed. And I don't know when things come back. When do we go to a football match? When do we go to the cinema? When do we go to a restaurant? You know, are you prepared to pay big money to have a decent restaurant deliver food to your home? Everything's changed, but some things will be for the better. But I'd like to see the UK do better in terms of hotels, in terms of holiday cottages. We live in the most beautiful country, and I will be searching somewhere around the countryside for August with the kids. But the airline industry is badly damaged, cruise lines, all these sort of things. And the thing that disturbs me most is farms. I don't know if you've been following. We've been importing Romanians and all sorts of nationalities to pick our crops, which I find quite galling. And there was a guy on the news the other day, and they said, "Well, how many they're picking spring onions? How many British people do you have?" I had 39, and 39 joined and 39 left. And I don't know if you remember back in the day when sorry, a phone call cut across. We were a sick country because, you know, we had a problem with the unions and, you know, the lack of the British the working mentality. So I'd love to see a rise of that drive. And we're not the British Empire anymore, but, you know, we want to make a name for ourselves if we're now outside Europe. I know we live in hope. We live in hope. But I do apparently ramble on a bit, and someone said the other day I have a gift of the gab, but I am actually a very shy person. There's a few things that interest me that I talk about, but can I throw some questions open if there's anything left that I haven't covered? But,
Harold, can we start with your question?
Hello, Mark.
Hi, Harold. Long time no see.
Long time. By the way, Judah Binstock was famous for buying cemeteries because each gravestone was a shareholder. Can you hear me?
Would say that again. Each
gravestone was a shareholder.
Was it?
And that way he would make public companies with very silent shareholders. He was famous.
Did he really do that?
Yeah. Here's my question.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Given the potential changes in work patterns at the moment because of lockdown, with the growing technology for very acceptable communication, reducing the need to travel so often for face-to-face meetings with clients, colleagues, and customers, how might this reflect on the provision and requirement for office buildings with substantial open plan floor plates? How might this reflect on investment values?
This is a question I've heard a few times, and I mean, number one, I worked from home for the first 8-9 weeks, and I've got quite a good setup at home, and the only thing I don't have is decent natural light. I've got a glass door to a light well and a staircase. And what I found was I was working 8 hours solid in darkness, and I have a TV screen on a wall so I could follow news flashes in the markets, and my desktop, and lots of these. I've never heard of Zoom before. All of a sudden I became acquainted with Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and Blue Jeans. Blue Jeans isn't as easy to operate. And I think this is great, and particularly with clients in the Far East, so they don't necessarily have to jump on a plane. They've taken a more bullish view on how to buy real estate. But the fact is, I miss, and I know I'm not the only one, I miss having human beings around to bounce ideas from, to react with. I think most human beings need to interact. I mean, I listened to Goldman's webinar. They've got 35,000 staff, 34,800 are at home working okay. And it, you know, and they were giving us all confidence that business as usual. I speak to my bank on a mobile. I know they're at home, which is a funny concept, but in a lot of businesses, people need to be around each other. And I don't think that will change. What I do think what will happen is part-time in the office, part-time at home. I mean, I have a partner that works half days, Fridays. You know, he works long time. I don't, you know, it doesn't bother me whether he works 5 days in the office or 2 days. But he was talking about, well, actually, you know, I work quite well from home and I get a lot more done. There's less interruptions. So I'm happy to do 4 days a week. We have to do social distancing in the office anyway for I don't know how long. So that will mean that we're not a full office. But I'm slightly old school. I think you need to press the flesh, lunches, meetings, and our business is relationship driven. I think it's easier to like me and respect me if I'm face to face. Yeah, lots of phone calls, sure, but and I've got an opinion as well on co-worker. Where we were going before this blew up, without doubt, we didn't have the overhang, the excesses of spec development as much as we had in previous cycles. So there was an acute shortage of offices. I remember you noticed in the city, as soon as spade hit the ground, firm of lawyers would come out and they were doing pre-lets and still are on the old building. So the supply was uber tight, and also WeWork had taken a lot of supply out of the system, and they were undercutting their competition and making a loss, as we know. So I think out goes the window of strangers sitting next to each other. People don't want it. And the big corporates were telling me that they wanted to change, because back of house and the large corporates, they were really side by side and they were too close. So we think that offices will naturally want to spread out from social distancing. Might be hot desks. You know, I don't know if any of you have seen Goldman Sachs offices. They are vast. I mean, I think it's 750,000 feet, and there's nothing in there. There's very little. There's very little furniture. They're hot desks. But I'm not an advocate. Certain hedge fund managers have said they live in beautiful homes, that they quite like the time out at home, trade from home. I can see that, but I think overall it's not going to happen. The professionals, the lawyers, the accountants, the surveyors, the CBREs and everyone, they don't want it to happen. So I'm not convinced at all. Oh, I can't hear you, Richard, sorry.
So I'm bad. Any more questions?
Any more questions?
Anyone else?
If you have a
Someone
question,
say.
you need to unmute yourself. Just click on your picture and press unmute. Then you has a question.
Mark
Yeah.
Gershenson, how are you?
Good, and you?
Yes, fine, thank you. Just a quick one, really. Were you never, you've obviously been a very successful agent, were you never tempted to cross over and become a principal with all that you knew and people that you...
Actually, I was, and that was at one stage in my mind, and you know, I got divorced. It was quite a big equity check, and it's funny, principals, you'll know this, and some of you will think, you know what, you've got no risk as an agent, and you're earning lots of money, your overheads aren't that high, you don't have an interest bill, and to a certain extent that's probably quite true. And yeah, so my feeling, I would have wanted to have done it. There was a public company once I was going to reverse into, Palmerston, as you remember. But I like what I do a lot. I take great pride in what I do. But yeah, I was tempted. But I think eventually, when I get pushed out of what I'm doing because I'm too old, and the youngsters are keeping the deals amongst themselves, I probably would like to be attached with a principal even if it's as a consultancy basis, because I'd like a new challenge. And hopefully by then it's not all about the money. I've got enough money to live on, but to have a new experience and a new challenge. But look, you've done it well, and who knows what the future has in store. But there will be opportunities coming up next year or so. I think as each rent quarter day goes by, it will throw up opportunities. But our biggest problem in finding opportunity, one of our biggest problems is if you're an overseas investor, you're not going to sell now because the pound is so weak. It's affecting their conversion back into US dollars or Hong Kong dollars, whatever, euros, whatever the currency is. The pound is super weak and could get weaker. If we go negative interest rates and we have a hard Brexit, we could have a devaluation of the pound. So we could be below parity to the dollar. Makes our imports more expensive, and you have that kind of looming fear of inflation. So there are lots of things out there that could influence the way we move going forward.
Another reason to be an agent.
It is. I mean, if I'm brutally honest, I get it on the way up, I get it on the way down, but I'm very protective to my clients, as Mr. Powell will tell you. But yeah, the only time we don't get it is when there's a disagreement on value, a market standoff, a stagnated market. But yeah, I'll get it on the way up, I get it on the way down. And the money changes. New faces come in, new buyers, and old ones go. So yeah, it's an evolving place. But it's interesting how everything changes. So today, there's a big health is a big thing. The way we live our lives, our diet, our exercise, as David says, cycling. And we're more conscious about what we put into our bodies. And actually being more conscious makes us feel better and gives us more energy. I look for how do I get more energy? So I'm a lunatic that trains 7 days a week, not overly trained, but I've got a lot of energy when driving. But anything else? Any more?
Any more?
Any more for any more? I just want to mention that I'm for Rays of Sunshine and TESEC, SEDEC charity. We're doing a webinar on the 25th, 12:30 till 2. I've got a really interesting panel. I've got Nick Leslaw, who will be obviously talking about his Travelodge portfolio and talking about CVAs, which I think by then I should be a lot more knowledgeable. I've got Ian Marcus, who's a fantastic guy. If you know Ian, Ian's had more positions, consultancies from starting at Bankers Trust, Credit Suisse, Eastdil, who are massive brokers and mortgage brokers, to Crown. He was a Crown Commissioner till 10 days ago. Served on a government body advising the Treasury about real estate. Sits on Nick Leslaw's board on the Remuneration Committee at Prestbury. No, really super interesting guy. Then I've got Stephen Conway, who I like enormously at Galliards, paired with Nick Candy, who's quite an interesting guy. Those two will make interesting bedfellows. I've got someone from Coutts and someone from Barclays, more on the private wealth side, but very interesting. I've got Ollie Shah from the Sunday Times business editor I'm quite friendly with, so he's quite interesting. And I hope to get possibly David Lammy, who could be quite interesting. And maybe Nick Candy's the treasurer for the Conservative London Mayor, chap called Mr. Bailey. So we hope to have him. So very varied and interesting array of people.
And we'll email out the flyer for that to everybody.
That's really kind. And I think it'll be interesting and it will be quite light-hearted. It will be fast-moving, a lot of topics, and we won't get stuck on any one subject. So And as I said, Rays of Sunshine, one can donate on the site at the same time. I really fear for the technology, though. I pray it works with Zoom, because I had a run through last night and they couldn't get me in. And it was, I think hopefully by then we'll have had it ironed out, but watch this space. But I think it will be interesting, and fingers crossed. And we're open to up to 500 people at one time on Zoom. So welcome any of you guys on board. And hopefully next time I can come and see you and have some breakfast, some scrambled eggs and stuff. I'm not sure where you go, and maybe where do you go these days?
We're still in St John's Wood. We're at Fora, which is on the corner. Just
I know Fora well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have a Turkish breakfast.
Yeah, they're nice people. They're good. I mean, it's my local, so I live around the corner, and I help look after the high street. So no, it'd be great.
No, and we're hoping that next month's meeting we might be able to do in a park if we're all allowed to meet, rather than on Zoom.
It's got to. You know, I've got to say, for what my opinion's worth, we've got to protect the NHS from another spike. But I almost think there's more damage done with stress and mental health for people at home alone than the risk of falling ill and badly ill with the virus. And there comes a point, because you look at all the other countries, it just keeps coming back.
Yeah.
And is there a vaccine going to be ready? I don't know.
Another year.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully. Okay. So
Anyone else, or
anyone?
I know we've lost a few that have had to go for 10 o'clock meetings. If there's anyone else.
Well, thank you very much then.
No, I think
Pleasure.
Mark. We will make
Long
sure
time.
we post your Rays of Sunshine Zoom charity event to everyone. And of course, if anyone wants to donate to Rays of Sunshine, you can of course go to the website and make a donation there.
we'll put the link up for that as well.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Rob. And thank you very much for having me. I feel honoured and humbled. But
And
I wish everyone well and a speedy return to normality. Stay safe.
thank you. We have Ian Marcus as a guest speaker, by the way, in a few months' time anyway.
Oh, perfect. He's such a he's the most humble guy I know.
Lovely man.
Lovely, lovely guy. And I take anyone's calls, and he's a great guy.
Great. Thank you, Mark. We'll keep
Good to
this
see you.
closed.
Take care. See you guys.
And the next meeting is going to be the 14th of July, where we have Alistair Moss, who's head of planning for the city.
Oh, he's a good guy.
Yeah, and he's putting together their new transport infrastructure, which is going to be very interesting. Lots of bike lanes, virtually no cars.
It's funny how I'm excited by bike lanes today, and yet we fought TfL for the superhighway going down Avenue Road and from Brent Cross, shutting off the roads. But
mind you, Park Lane seems a bit illogical when you look at it.
I went from a cycle lane going up Tater Road and had to get down up a Brook Street. I'd take on a Brompton, I'd take my life into my own hands going across 3 lanes. But you're right, it is illogical.
There's 3 bike lanes. You got the bike, you got the park, you got the one on the pavement, and now got the one on the road.
I know. You wait for Regent Street to open up.
Yeah. All right. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.